Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Norm Laviolette, who is a comedian and an entrepreneur. We're going to talk about how improv can help us personally and professionally, and also how not to take ourselves so seriously. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote is from Jim Rohn. Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. We talk about money as the fuel that allows us to live the life of our dreams. Another kind of fuel is the food we eat to power our bodies. For years, we've been served by corporate food, things that are made in factories with chemical names we can't even pronounce. If we keep eating this stuff, it's going to have a long-term effect on our bodies. We need to start questioning and understanding how our bodies process the foods we eat, because we're all different, and different foods affect us all differently. Many foods can cause inflammation and allergic reactions. Nothing so severe like a kid with a peanut allergy, but something on a much smaller scale. You have to wonder why so many people have stomach issues. The closer you can come to eating foods that are in their natural state, the healthier you will become. You should also question why we eat 3 meals a day. I'm working on getting some food experts on to talk about the microbiome and the gut health. And hopefully that will give us a better understanding of the subject. I was excited to have Norm on as a guest because I'm looking forward to taking improv classes. I think it will help me react faster to situations in life and learn to collaborate better and to negotiate. During this interview, we had a little bit of a connection problem in the beginning. However, it clears up totally after the first 10 minutes. Norm Laviolette is the co-founder and CEO of Improv Asylum. He has performed, directed, and produced more than 10,000 improvisational comedy shows on 3 continents. He brings the experience of building companies from the ground up into multi-million-dollar businesses. His new book, The Art of Making It Up, How to Work Together to Become an Unstoppable Powerhouse, was just released. He describes how the techniques of improv can transform teams into more powerful, creative, and healthy organizations. Let's meet Norm. Welcome to Richer Soul, Norm Laviolette. It's great to have you join us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
And I am excited to have you because doing improv is one of the things on my bucket list of things I need to work on.
Well, it's time you kick that bucket. There's no reason to delay.
No reason at all. So we always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
when you have the luxury of looking back on how you grew up, that's when you see the bonds or the things that brought you to where you are. And they may not be recognizable in the moment. But for me, the way I grew up would have never dictated or told you that this is where I was going to end up, right? I work in the entertainment industry. I've been working in entertainment and comedy now for 20 some odd years. I grew up incredibly blue collar, right? Like blue collar, lower blue collar. Grew up in a small mill town by Worcester, Massachusetts, which is a city in the heart of Massachusetts. My dad was a truck driver. My mom was an auto industry. She worked on the line, in the car industry. We were very much that. I don't think either of my parents probably didn't have more than a ninth grade education, right? So that's how I grew up. And what I learned from money and how to look at things was parents weren't educated and they weren't particularly savvy in the sense of investing or anything like that. But damned if they didn't work incredibly hard for whatever they earned. And so that was always at the top of their mind. They put a real premium on working hard for what you have and being smart about it and protecting it. And I think that for me was a very big lesson, which is not necessarily how much you have, it's what are you doing with what you got.
And that's very important. I guess they're changing the way that they look at money. Instead of looking at it from a scarcity type of mindset, they're saying, hey, this is what we have. How do we make the best of it?
And it's true, right? And these things can sound like so cliche when you talk about them. I had a great life. I grew up, as I say, very blue collar, but oh my God, it was fantastic. The other thing, too, that I learned from the money standpoint about it, which is, on the other hand, from a scarcity standpoint, it was made pretty clear to me early on that if I wanted more in life, then I was going to have to go out and figure it out. I was very lucky in that while my parents may have been working in these kind of industries, for whatever reason, they also very much supported me in the sense of they believed I could do anything. And I don't know why they would have ever believed that, because I was not really any different than anybody else. They weren't bitter or jaded, at least towards me as a kid, as a child. They wanted to see me do more. They were the biggest cheerleaders when I started doing things in comedy and entertainment. They didn't say, oh, that's stupid, that's dumb, that's pie in the sky, you got to get a real job. For whatever reasons, they were incredibly supportive, even in the face of whatever their own life, kind of threw at them.
And that's pretty awesome, because I know a lot of times parents will be somewhat jaded to non-traditional paths. And it sounds in your case that they were super supportive, which is cool.
Yeah.
How did you decide to get into the comedy and improv business?
Again, it goes back to kind of family in a way. My family was super funny. My mom, super funny woman. She came from a family of 19 children. So she was one of 19. That's a lot of kids. I got a lot of aunts and uncles. But my dad was super funny as well. And one of the things that I always remembered was when the aunts and uncles would come over and they'd all be playing hearts in the kitchen and there'd be that low blue haze of cigarette smoke, filling the kitchen. This was a different time. And everybody was, loud and laughing and yelling. And it was one of those things of if you had a sense of humor, if you could make people laugh, you had a seat at the table. And it didn't really matter what your economic status was or your education status was. It was really powerful. And I think that, that probably had a bigger effect on me than I imagined at the time. And so I came from a funny family. I was always funny in the sense of, had a pretty good sense of humor, loved comedy. My parents, I was that type of kid that was watching, the Richard Pryor specials on HBO at 10 years old. I didn't have those kind of rules where no, you can't listen to that kind of stuff. And so I always liked it, but I didn't think I was going to go into comedy. I was no different than anybody else. And then I ended up, I was just a typical kid and played sports and football and stuff like that. And then, found myself and made my way to a University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And, I was no academic superstar by any stretch of the imagination. But what I always did have was a pretty good sense of humor. And then for whatever reason, it started to feel different in terms of how even I interacted with people or how I was even being introduced to people. And I really kind of, this is something that's pretty cool. So for whatever reason, I got in my head that I was going to create my own late night TV show at UMass. And so I did, and it was terrible. It was awful. And it was fantastic, and I think that's when I really started to say hey, maybe this is something I have a knack for and that I could pursue.
And I think that's the thing. When you first start doing something the first time, it's terrible until you improve it and it gets better. And then little by little, it becomes amazing. How did that go with regards to you? Like, how did you get from where you started to where you are as far as improvement?
It's something that I say all the time, and forgive me if I'm being a little crass here, but something I say all the time is the first step to greatness is sucking, right? I mean, you got to suck at something when you first start at it, right? You're not very good. And the thing is, for most people, especially the older we get, it's easy to do when you're younger, but the older we get, we're so fearful of being bad at something, right? And it's that voice in our head that says we're going to look stupid. People are going to judge us. That holds us back at almost every age. That's the first thing that you have to overcome. And the older we get, I think the harder it becomes. It's easy to do this when you're younger in that, you're used to taking chances, right? But the older we get, it becomes, I think, more difficult because we're so worried about looking stupid, feeling stupid, being judged. That holds us back from so much. And for me, for whatever reasons, the idea of looking or feeling stupid didn't really hold me back from too much. So I was willing to try that because I knew that that's what I had to do. And so I did that. And then I got into the UMass comedy troupe called Mission Improbable and started finding some basic college success there. But it felt like something that a little bit different. I was like, wow, I think that this could be something that this makes sense to me in terms of the ability to do it. And so I don't really know why. I can tell you exactly how I came to this, but in my mind, once I left school and started to pursue comedy, what I said to myself was like, well, look, this is my business. If this is going to be successful, I'm a business. I'm a man business. I've got to treat this as if it's my job, even before it's my job, right? That becomes very important. And what that does is, it allows you to approach it in a systematic and professional manner. So for me, while I may have been in Boston doing open mic nights and barely performing, people would ask me, well, what do you do? I'd say, well, I'm a comedian. They're like, well, oh, yeah, well, where can I see you? I'm like, oh, you might be able to see me. They're like, oh, you're not really a comedian then. I'm like, no, I definitely am. And I'm just not doing as many shows as I want right now. And I really focused on treating it as my job even before it was my job.
So it sounds like you had the right mindset up front. You knew what you wanted, you knew where you were going, and you were willing to go through the struggles to make it happen. And it's funny because I think a lot of time people think that everyone's watching us and judging us, and more often than not, people aren't. They're ignoring us. They don't even know. And a lot of it is the voices in our head. And to be able to get up on stage and to get over, I guess, the number one fear that most people have, which is public speaking, it takes a little bit of gumption to go for it.
It does, right? It does. And I think you said it exactly right. People don't think about us nearly as much as we think they do. We are all horrible narcissists. We pretty much focus on ourselves, and we are the stars of our own movies, right? And so it's very rare that, think about your own life. You probably don't go to bed at night spending a lot of time thinking about all the different people that you ran into during the course of the day. No, you don't. You think about the challenges that you face today and the challenges that you're going to face. So when you start realizing that people don't think about us as much as we think they do, it's very liberating. And then you're right. It takes gumption to get on stage. But if we only leave it at that, then that seems like it's only for a chosen few. Anything can be learned, can be overcome. And the fear of going on stage or speaking can be overcome and work.
And so we have a lot of people who are in business or who have professional careers and so forth. And I think you do teach comedy and improv. How does comedy and improv help us to become more successful in our business lives?
Improv Asylum, and that's the company that I own. We started out as an entertainment company. We do live shows, and people can wrap their heads around that and understand what that is. But it's really grown over the course of the years. We now have an entire training center where probably about 500 or 600 students a year go through our training center, and they learn more of a deep dive on improvisation. And as it relates to the business world, it's interesting because it's a couple things. So the majority of the people who take classes at Improv Asylum are not looking to be comedians or actors. I would dare say 90% probably are not, if not more. And at first, that doesn't make any sense. People are like, well, no, you would only take a class if you want to be a comedian. That's not true at all. when people take classes at places like Improv Asylum, you take an improv class, by and large, what people are looking to do is they're looking to work on their own communication skills or their own soft skills. And it could be to become more creative. It could be to be, which is one of the first ones, a better or more comfortable public speaker. Those are the reasons why people will take classes. And if you think about it, even from a business standpoint, that's a way better business model. Because if I was only teaching classes to people that wanted to do comedy, that's a very small market. Teaching improv classes to people that want to feel a little bit more comfortable, think faster on their feet, figure out a way to be more collaborative, that's a better market. And so that's really where a lot of our teaching and training comes from. The other big thing is the reality of the workplace today is that it's far more collaborative and it's far less top down in terms of its leadership. And so one of the things that we hear all the time is, people talking about, oh, well, we need to collaborate more. We need to collaborate more. That's all well and good to talk about that. What are the actual skill sets of collaboration? And, people that do comedy, troupes that do comedy, or other artists that collaborate, they know and have the skills. You should look to them. So that's where the training comes from. And then from there, we've actually put together, and this was like 20 years ago, that led to our whole corporate training division, where literally I work with companies, Fortune 500 companies around the globe, teaching the tenets and ideas of improvisation about how groups work better together and collaborate and innovate together. And that's very much what we focus on when we do our corporate training.
What are those tenets that help people collaborate more?
It's about coming to agreement. If you want to collaborate, you got to get to agreement. You can't collaborate if you're constantly saying no to each other, if you're constantly sharpshooting each other's ideas, especially at the very beginning of the process. And so in improvisation, what we're taught, right, is that we have to keep it in agreement as much as possible because we don't have time. So to paint the picture for your audience, if you've never ever been to a show at Improv Asylum, the theater, it's like down in a basement theater, right? It's like a bomb shelter. It's fantastic. Perpetual night. You go into that theater and it's a 200-seat theater and the stage is on the ground and the audience is on four sides of you. There are 200 people surrounding you. They're drunk and they're yelling stuff at you. It's the definition of a hostile work environment. So for us, that's just what we call Friday night. So the question becomes, how do we as a group create under such a stressful environment? And the way we do that is we work long and hard on techniques, communication techniques that allow us to quickly negotiate, come to an agreement, and move an idea forward together. Right? That's the skill set that we use on stage. And it's those practical skills that we use as actors that we bring to the corporate world.
I've read a little bit about improv and I've talked to some people. And I know that one of the things that always comes up as a tenet is the yes and. So
Correct.
You never say no to an idea. Even if you don't like it, you say yes, and then you kind of direct it and build it to the next thing that you want to go to. Is that one of those skills?
Yeah. One of the key tenets of modern improvisation today, you're right, is this concept of yes and. And all it means, I almost feel like at some point this is almost overblown or misused. All yes and means is yes, I'm truly trying to understand what it is that you're saying. And you put the and on, and I'm willing to put my idea on top of it. So yes is good. And is where the innovation lies. And is where our next step is. Now, if you and I are on stage together, and you know that every time you throw out an idea, I'm going to say yes and then build off of it. And every time I throw out an idea, I know you're going to say yes and build off of my idea. Then we can quickly build together. Now, look, when you come see a show, do we say no to each other? Do we negate? Do we do arguments? Of course we do, right? Because that would be, if all you ever did was yes, and, that would be a completely fake world that we create. Even when we're saying no to each other, we're actually on stage still saying yes and, in the sense that we're building with each other and we're trying to move ideas forward. How it relates to the business world is, if I'm somebody in your audience, I might go, well, that's a crock of crap. I'm not just going to say yes and every time an idea is thrown out there. What I would challenge back is in the idea phase, that's where it's important to keep in a yes and mindset, because that's where innovation and discovery is. Now, at some point, you got to say no, or you got to trim down, or you got to say, well, look, that's a really interesting idea, but we're never going to be able to do that. My point is, if you say no at the very, very beginning of the ideation phase, you've got nowhere to go. If you and I say yes, and even if we don't necessarily, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, but I'm going to try to go somewhere, we're going to get there together. And whatever idea we end up on, you and I are going to have ownership to it. And while ideas are great, there's a zillion ways to come up with ideas. More importantly, though, if we settle on an idea that you and I own, we're going to trust each other more. We're going to want to work with each other more. We're going to be more likely to collaborate, and that becomes a much stronger working culture because we're looking to listen to each other and work with each other as opposed to shoot each other down.
And I think that's a very big thing that you just mentioned, and I think is something that many time leaders don't understand, is that you have to build something together, because if you're not, if it's a top-down type of leadership where you're telling people what to do, they have zero buy-in. And then you wonder why no one's engaged at work is because you don't allow them to be engaged. And the second part of what you talked about was, I guess it's really the art of listening, of hearing the other idea, understanding it, and building upon it together. And so when you have that collaboration, I can see how that makes for much greater outcomes.
You're right. And if you think about it, right, how it relates to the business world, we create teams. That's what we do on this stage. We create high functioning teams that work in a pressurized environment. If you can create a really good team, you can go further. Look, I'm still the leader of my company, right? So at some point, I still can say, these are all really great ideas, and I've really considered all of them, and I still think I'm right. You're always going to have that. Like a lot of times leaders, they think like, well, does that mean I give over all my power, my influence? So does that mean I don't get to decide? No, of course it doesn't. What I would argue is now I'm a leader. I have my ideas, which are good, and I have all of your ideas, which potentially can be good. So I've actually aggregated and crowdsourced creativity to come up with better ideas. And if it so happens that I pick one of my team's ideas, you're right, you have better buy-in. If I end up going with my own idea, at least my team is more likely to feel like, hey, at least we were listened to. At least we were considered. And now I'll also have a better chance to have them have buy-in, even if I go with my own decision or my own idea.
And so that brings up a question, because we all have self-doubts. And a lot of times when you're throwing ideas out there, there are people who aren't going to love them. How do we overcome those voices in ourself to accept those things and to have confidence to keep going?
One of the things I talk about in the book that I wrote was a lot of times what you want to do, you want to work on the skill sets outside of the office, right? So if you're worried about the ability, or you don't have the self-confidence to pitch ideas in the office, because that's the playing field, right? That's when it counts. That's when it truly it can have consequences, and things can hurt if you're made to look or feel foolish. The beauty of, like, let's say taking an improv class or an acting class or a singing lesson, it doesn't really matter, right? Is that you're learning to take risks in a controlled setting. So let's take an improv class, for example. If you take an improv class, you're initially going to feel very scared and nervous and self-conscious and be like, oh my God, I'm going to throw up in my mouth and I can't do this. But if you can get to that class, you'll look around and you'll see like, oh, everybody else feels the same way. And then you calm down a little bit. And then you'll start doing these improvisational exercises and games. And now you're learning to take risks in an appropriate environment. And the more you do that in that environment, in your improv class or wherever, you're going to get more comfortable with it. So that the idea is, hopefully, in a month or 2 or 3 months' time, when you go into that ideation meeting, you're going to have faced taking chances and risks and failures in a safer environment and learn that it's okay. You'll be able to apply that in your real-world setting.
We become more comfortable with our failure, or we just accept that failure is a part of growth, or what happens? Because fear of failure is another big issue out there.
Yeah, I think it's all those things. I think you feel more comfortable with it, right? And if you feel more comfortable with it, you can confidently say, okay, great, you didn't like my idea. That's cool. But you can still be confident in your own idea and also not take it so personally. I think that's really what it is if you throw out enough ideas, and as a comedian or as a performer, I mean, ideas almost mean nothing to me. I got a zillion of them. Okay, you don't like this one? Here's another one. You think that one's stupid? Okay, here's another one. I've become so immune to whether you think my idea is a good idea or not, because I don't know. Ideas are inherently they're neutral. They're not really good or bad. They just are. And so I become far more comfortable now with saying, like, yeah, it doesn't matter to me what you think of it. You don't like that one? Okay, I'm not going to take it overly personal. Here's another one. And that's what these kind of classes do, is they help you build up that thicker skin of not worrying so much about looking or feeling so stupid.
And I think that's a key point, is removing the emotion from the situation. Because, I mean, the reality is you can tell a joke and half the room will like it and half the room hates it. But if you're talking to the half the room that hates it, it doesn't mean your joke was bad. It just wasn't for them. And I think that happens too often when you have too small a group that you're talking to. There's going to be people who don't like it, and you need to, as you said, insulate yourself from removing your emotion and being tied to the idea and just looking at it objectively.
So I'll give you an example, right? As a comedian, this is a very classic example. You're doing a show for 200 people, okay? And you're on that stage, and 198 people are just laughing and having the time of their lives, right? And there's two people in the front row, and they got their arms crossed, and they got the sourpuss look on their face, and they just are not buying it. As a younger or a newer performer, oftentimes you key in on those people, right? And they drive you crazy. They're like, how do I get these people, right? As you become a more savvy and experienced performer, you start to say, hey, 198 people love me. So where's the return on my energy better put? Am I going to get a greater return on continuing to give my output to the 198 people that are already really liking what I do? Or would I get a better return if I focus on the 2% or the 1% that don't like what I do? Well, of course, it's going to be the 198. And you learn to say, like, hey, it's not for everybody. I also might be misreading it. That couple in the front row may have just had a fight at dinner. They may have just got a call from their babysitter saying that they got to leave early. Their kid's sick. I don't know. And so, that's part of what we learn as performers, is saying, like, not assuming a response one way or the other.
Yeah, you're putting your own emotion on the situation without the facts of knowing at all what's going on in the other person's mind.
Exactly right.
You mentioned the book. You wrote a book. It's The Art of Making SHIT Up. Why did you write the book?
Oh, why did I write the book? Such a good question. I've been doing this for a long time, 20 years, built Improv Asylum. We're in Boston and New York. Over that time, I've done, I've either acted in, produced, directed, tens of thousands of shows with the training center, and now doing the corporate training stuff, all around the country and all around the world. And I would often be asked, like, oh, you should write a book. You should write a book. And, for me, I'm like, I don't know. That seems like a lot of work. I do improv. That part of the reason I do improv is because I was too lazy to, focus on scripted work. Well, I don't want to write a book. But I think after 20 years, you start to say, well, yeah, maybe I do have some things that I can impart. And so Wiley, the publisher, they had actually reached out to me, and they say, hey, would you write a book? And I was like, well, what are we talking about here? Would you publish a book I would write? And they said, sure, or we'd consider it. So I said, well, maybe now would be a good time to put down a little bit of what I know, along with anecdotally, some of the stuff I've been through in my career. And, as you said, the title is The Art of Making, I'll say the SH is silent. So The Art of Making It Up. And I purposely titled it that to also say, hey, man, we don't need to take this creative stuff so seriously. I'm very serious about what I do, but I don't take myself too seriously. And we don't have to if we're going to create.
And that's very true for life in general, right? If we take ourselves too seriously, then we're probably pretty grumpy.
No.
Just enjoy life and have fun, and happiness comes in the journey, and you've got to learn to kind of let go. And you are going to have your ups, you're going to have your downs. And when you can learn to laugh at that, it just makes life a lot better.
There's an idea, right, that laughter is the best medicine. It is. In my own business with the live comedy theaters and comedy clubs that I own, I say it all the time. Hey, in good times, people really like to laugh. In bad times, they really need to laugh. And it's something that we all need to remember. It's like, it's almost nothing is so bad that at some point you can't, laugh to break the ice on it. Why do people always want to laugh at funerals, right? It's a study that's been proven. People want to laugh at funerals, at least some sub-segment of who are there. And it's because it's a stress relief. That's what's going on. It's not inappropriate. It's not callous. It's not people don't care. That's why people tend to laugh in what would often be considered inappropriate times. It's not that they're being rude. It's because that's their stress relief.
What are some of the main themes that come across in the book that you share?
Yeah, some of the things we talked about, we hit upon already. I think for me, one of the biggest ones is being able to address and push through that voice that's inside all of our heads. And that's inside mine as well to this day. That voice that tells you you're not good enough, or you shouldn't do it, or you shouldn't pursue that wild thing. And I'm not even talking about business ideas. That's great if it's a business idea. But if you really wanted to if for whatever reason, you just really wanted to take ballroom dancing, usually it's a voice in your head that's saying, like, oh, well, people are going to laugh, or oh, my wife is going to think it's stupid if I bring it up, or my friends are going to make fun of me if I want to do ballroom dancing. That voice stops us from exploring and finding out and enjoying life so much. And it's something that we talk about of how you try to get past that voice that is always trying to stop you.
And that's a big one. That's a real, real big one right there. I always say, I think it's a lot harder to start something than it is once you're started. Like just taking that first step more often than not is the hardest thing.
Oh, absolutely. And so we even talk about practical things. And sometimes I put it in the comedy world, right? But what can you do about it, right? It's all well and good to say, you should face your fears. Okay, great. You should eat top-notch sushi. Okay, great. Tell me where I can get top-notch sushi, right? So, for me, it's like, all right, what is that thing? Because we all probably have something. It can be ballroom dancing. It can be taking an improv class. It can be starting a business. But it's what can you do? So for me, if it's taking a ballroom dancing class, what's the first thing I can do? All right, today, just Google ballroom dancing near you. And that's it. That's all. But it's a step. And then the next time you click online on one of the websites and start looking at it. It's another step. And then the next thing is like, just sign up for the class. You don't even have to commit to going. Just sign up for the class. But you keep taking those proactive steps one by one. And then next thing you know, you're like, well, I signed up. I paid the money. All right, just commit to going to the first class. You go to the first class and then allow yourself to quit if you don't like it. But invariably what happens when you go to the first class, you like it because because you've been thinking about wanting to take ballroom dancing or improv or whatever for a very long time. And those are some of we kind of go through like some of those practical things that you can do to move your ideas forward.
I think that's very important. I think a lot of people think, oh, in order to do something, I need to take massive action, right? I've got to make this big, bold thing. But what you're talking about is teeny little steps where literally, Googling and finding a class. I mean, you can't fail at that, right? It's not hard. It's so simple. And yet people don't do that little teeny step. And when you keep doing those little steps, they compound over time.
Well, they really do. And the massive action will come later. With the massive action will come when all of a sudden you've taken enough, levels 1 and 2 and 3 of ballroom dancing. And you're like, oh my God, I have found my calling. And then at some point, you will then, to wildly accelerate your experience, you'll start to take a massive action. But you can't take a massive action right in the very beginning because you're not really sure what it is that you're doing. And so you take all these micro steps, but if you aggregate all the micro steps, that's how you get it. I mean, we all know these common sayings, and they may sound trite, but there's such wisdom in it, right? A journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. I don't know if I can walk 1,000 miles, but I can walk a couple steps. So I just walk a couple steps.
And that's very true. And I've heard of the domino theory, and I don't think I've talked about it on the air, but what they basically talk about is when you look at dominoes, and it's based on physics, a domino can knock down a domino that's 50% bigger than it is. but it's not going to knock down a domino that's 100 times bigger than it is. But if you have one domino knocking down a domino that's 50% bigger, and that one's knocking down the next domino that's 50% bigger, and that one's knocking down the next domino that's even bigger, across 10 dominoes, you can get that leverage to knock down that big, massive action that you talk about. But when you get there, it's really no longer massive action because you did all the little steps that makes that next big, massive action actually a teeny little step.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And all of a sudden you're there and you're like, oh, and you look back and you're like, oh, that's right. Remember when I was so afraid to even call, about the improv class or the ballroom dancing or the flying lessons, or when I was afraid to call my financial advisor because I've always felt like I don't know enough about finance, and so if I speak to a financial advisor, I'm going to look and sound like an idiot. Yeah, okay, that's all right. The financial advisor doesn't mind. I didn't know much about finance, and I led with, "Hey, I don't know much about this stuff. Teach me." They're always happy to do that.
We'll be back with Norm in a moment. Where are you with picking the path you want in your life and business? Are you struggling with the first step, or are you at the point of massive action? In both of these situations, having someone standing beside you to create the action plans and prevent pitfalls is massive. I work with my clients to use their money to create the life of their dreams. First, we have to ensure that we have profit that can fuel what we want. Taking these steps can be scary, and having someone who walks the path and can prevent you from mistakes is a major benefit. Are you ready to take your life and business to the next level? I can help you accelerate the curve to achieve success faster. A short call, and we can see if we're a good fit. Email me at rocky@richyoursoul.com to get the first domino moving. Now, let's get back to our amazing conversation with Norm and learn about the power of dominoes. That they are. And the funny thing is, and we've talked about this in the past, a lot of financial advisors are nothing more than salespeople. They don't even know what they're talking about. They just sound really good doing it.
Sure.
So you have to make sure you have someone who actually understands the finances behind the numbers.
Yeah, you always have to assume, and one of these things, right? My belief in the world is pretty much nobody knows anything. Always go into it like that, and that includes myself. You can listen to what I have to say, but there's also a whole bunch, but maybe I don't know what the hell I'm talking about either. But if you go into it, with that mindset, nobody knows anything. That includes me, so I also have a lot to learn, but I also want to have my eyes open.
And that's very true. I think when you go in, that literally is curiosity. Because when you go in with the mindset that I don't know anything, you're actually willing to learn and listen. And you may actually learn a little bit more than you thought you knew. Yeah.
I use 3 metrics in my life that help me roughly make decisions, both for my professional life, my personal life, and stuff like that. And, for me, it's very basic. As a business owner, an entrepreneur, I look at it 3 ways. Is it going to make me a lot of money? Because if it is, then I'll consider it. Do I love it? If I love doing something, then that in and of itself is intrinsically worth it, right? If I love mountain biking, I'm going to mountain bike. Do I make money at mountain biking? Is there any really huge, giant benefit business-wise to me mountain biking? No, but I do love it. And that's okay. It's all right to do things that you love, even without much of a return. And then the final thing is, or am I intellectually curious about it? And I find that to be the most important one, because how am I ever going to know if I love something, or how am I ever going to know if something can make me money if I don't allow myself to at least be intellectually curious about it? And then I'll walk down the path for a little while. Maybe it's I love it, or maybe I turn like, oh yeah, no, this was cool. I'm glad I took a ballroom dancing class. One's enough because I don't love it enough, but at least I've left myself open to that discovery.
That's very true. And those are some pretty cool buckets to look at life and make judgments on it, because there is a lot more to life than just making money. We do have to enjoy what we love, and curiosity is that constant growth. So you're always improving yourself, making yourself better. And that, to me, is the way to live life. So that is very, very cool. As an entrepreneur, how much do you actually focus on your numbers? Like, yeah, I look at it as, hey, you're in the comedy business, but at the end of the day, you still have to run a business, correct?
Oh, yeah. It makes no difference. It doesn't matter that I'm in comedy or, if I'm selling potted plants. I mean, the numbers are everything, right? This is a business. It's called show business. It's not show fun. It's a for-profit business, and between Improv Asylum and the theaters here in Boston and the theater in New York, I also own a stand-up comedy venue called Laugh Boston in the Seaport, and I have another arm of the company called Asylum Gaming and Esports. Amongst all of my operations, we have close to 100 employees, and this is a business. And it's all about the numbers. It's about the audiences coming in and what the average price per head and what it is that how much they're spending at the bar, how many shows you can put in. The shows that you're pricing will dictate how much you can pay the talent. I mean, it's all right there in the numbers, and you really have to make sure that you're paying attention to it. And I think coming from an artistic business, at least early on, when we first started Improv Asylum, we were an anomaly because we said to ourselves, we're going to focus just as much on the business as we do the art, because it had been our experience that either you had a lot of artists that would focus on the art but couldn't sustain themselves because they didn't learn how to run the business, or you had business people that were like, well, I want to get into the arts, and they could run the numbers, but their art was crap. And for us, we said, well, look, those are mutually sustaining platforms. If you have really, really great art, that's good for the bottom line. If you have a really good, solid business platform, that gives stability for the art to flourish and be created. We're very focused on the numbers.
And that is an anomaly, because I think most artists have a fear of numbers, and they also have a fear of attaching the money value to their work. And they struggle with that internally. And I've heard that a lot from the artistic side. Do you see that in people that you deal with?
I do see that quite a bit. And what I always kind of put out there, and I don't really know why I've always thought this way, but I've always looked at it, especially from an art standpoint, is why I could never get my mind around why an artist would intentionally devalue themselves, right? I believe that good art, I don't care if it's music or painting or television or comedy, has as much value to the world as selling insurance, right? I just do. And I don't believe that just because you sell insurance and you make music, that one is more valuable than the other. Now, the marketplace will dictate the demands and all of that. I get it. But intrinsically, I've always been like, no, artists, treat yourself as with the value that you want. And more than likely, you'll get that in return. If you treat yourself as a commodity that is not worth much, well, then, I mean, it's the marketplace. If you say you're not worth much, then I'm going to pay you what you say you're worth, probably. It's that simple.
And it happens in business, too. People always undervalue themselves. They undervalue what they think they're worth. And probably because it takes a little courage to say, no, I'm not going to work for that. I'm worth this. And learning to accept the no. When someone says, well, no, I'm not going to pay you that, and say, that's fine, I'll find somebody who will. And I've heard that from the successful people in business is they're the ones who continually raise their prices. They're the ones who continually ask for more and who but also they improve themselves, like you talked about. They're constantly listening and curious to what their customers want, and they continue to work on their craft to make themselves better. And then their value does go up tremendously. Sure,
your value has to go up, because if your value doesn't go up, well, then at some point you're just delivering crap or you're a scam artist, right? But if you're constantly getting better, then you want to make sure that you're increasing your ask. So if you look at Improv Asylum, okay, in the improv and sketch comedy world, which admittedly is a pretty niche world, but it's even niche within comedy, the tickets at Improv Asylum are probably, I think, the second most expensive in the world. Now, I will also tell you that on a Saturday night to get tickets to Improv Asylum in Boston, it's $29. So it ain't that expensive. But comparatively to almost anywhere else in the world, I think that's the second highest price. And that's by design, right? Because what we'd always say to the actors, and actors, they get real squishy about things like, I don't know, that's a lot of money to be charging for an improv and sketch comedy show. I would always come in and say, like, look, everybody, whatever we're charging, let's do a show that when the audience leaves, they feel like whatever they paid, it was cheap. Let's do a show when they left and they paid $20. The audience goes, man, I would have paid 30. I would have paid 40 for that show. I want them to say, these guys are idiots. They should be charging more. That's what I want my audience to say. Because now we're really pushing the envelope. We're delivering the value. And it's the same with our corporate training. We're definitely not the cheapest out there. You can find cheaper alternatives that work within the same realm of what we do, which is leadership and communication ideation through improv. We are definitely one of the more expensive offerings, but there's a reason for it. We've been doing it for 20 years and we're one of the best.
And that's the thing. You put in the time and you continue to improve yourself. Did you have people who helped you along the way, a coach or somebody else who was instrumental in your success? I
did not. It's a question I get all the time. And the typical answer I think most people would say is they had a mentor or somebody of that nature. For me, I didn't. For me, it was all more or less trial and error and learning on the go and on the fly. I didn't have anybody. And so I think that certainly at times set me back. And I probably made maybe some more mistakes than others because I just had to learn. But yeah, no, for me, not really. It was always more, I don't know, I think this is what we're going to try to do. I'm going to try to do it. If part of it worked, I would try to focus and grow that part of it. If something failed, I tried to learn from why it failed and do something different. But no, for me, mostly it's learning on the streets or on the stages of comedy.
And that's perfectly fine, as long as you keep showing up and learning. You walk into a lot of companies. I'm assuming a lot of times you'll walk in cold, correct? Where you haven't really met the people or understood their culture before. Is that correct or is that not?
Almost every time.
When you walk in, what are the things that kind of surprise you most as you see how that particular place functions?
I would almost change that phrasing of that question, which is, or should I say, I'm almost surprised how unsurprising it is, if that makes any sense.
It does. I guess the question then is what are the things that you consistently see every time you walk in? Because they're probably the same.
Sure. While every company, considers themselves, an individual, distinct, and special entity, and of course they are. On the other hand, we're all very much similar. And I think what I see in companies all the time is you walk into this room, right? And you're right, it's a cold room. So if you hire me to come in to work with you, for a training session or whatever, and I might be working with 20, 30 people at a time, up to 4,000, and that's a larger group. But typically you're 20 or 30 people. Well, 20 or 30 people, by and large, didn't hire me. One person did. One person thought it was a good idea. So the rest of them had to be there. So I know right going in that there's a whole bunch of people that are going okay, I don't want to be here, or let's see what this is about, or I'd rather be going to get a beer somewhere. And so you walk into this and you know that it's a cold room. And really, though, what I can see in everybody's eyes, especially when you throw in the fact that not only is it corporate training, but there's going to be some improv element to it, is this sense of self-consciousness and fear. This, I don't want to be put in a position to look stupid. So some people will be more aggressive and kind of give you a don't pick me or angry look. Other people will be more just scared and sit in the back. But it's the same thing. We are so fearful of putting ourselves out there and trying something new. And it only gets calcified the older we get. And for many of us, the longer we're in the same industry or the same job. And so that's what I see again and again, this fear of wanting to try or explore or entertain something new or different, even if it's just for an hour or two.
And I think that's a big point because I'm 53. And one of the things that I see is that as people get older, if they're not willing to change, one day they're no longer needed because the world changed and they didn't. And so you've got to constantly reinvent yourself. Otherwise, you're in trouble. I mean, imagine going to a doctor who still practices the medicine the way he did when he graduated 20 years ago. You wouldn't want to go to that doctor because he hasn't grown, he hasn't changed, he hasn't kept up with new technology and new ways of doing things. And so I think that's a big thing that people have to do is constantly improve their game.
Sure. And it's the idea of like, well, you have experience and it's worth something, but that's your best practice. So you think about yourself. If you're 53, 55, 60, you've got a lot of great experience to bring to the world. What are your best practices? What do you know that are some universal truths for you? And then say, but what else is kind of fluid? Technology, new concepts, new ideas. So it's not about throwing yourself away. It's about focusing on your best practices and then being open to other ideas. You know, I say this all the time, right? It helps people remember. You want to be in a groove and not a rut, right? A groove, it's still kind of a lane, right? But you're flowing and there's a little room on either side of you and you're moving. A rut, you're too deep and the walls are too high above you and you can't get out of the rut. You want to be in a groove and not a rut.
And that's an excellent suggestion. Is there anything else that you wanted to share on the subject today but didn't get a chance to?
I would encourage everybody, and especially as it looks, if you look even in terms of how it relates to business, is what are the steps that you can do to maybe just think or approach something new? It's easy. It's easy to say if you're an entrepreneur and you own your own company, it's like, all right, great, I can make my decisions and whatever. It becomes so much harder if you're in a company, a staid company, and you have a smaller impact on what it is or in your own decision-making process. But I would really, really encourage people to say, how can you approach something just a little bit different and try something just a little bit different in your own job or industry or life that you haven't yet? And when you start doing that, maybe it works or maybe it doesn't. It almost doesn't matter. But what it does is you're starting to build the skill and the muscle of trying new things. And that's what an improv class is. You're developing the muscle to try new things so that when you put it into practice at your office, it's a little bit more developed. You're a little bit stronger. And so that's what I would really encourage people to do is, be open to trying more things, both in their professional and their business life.
And that kind of leads us into the next question, which was based on our conversation. What's one action step people can take to move forward this week? Do you have something maybe that gives them that teeny step towards that bigger step?
I do. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. Let's see where you can use the concept of yes and in a conversation that you're having. Because all yes and is a tool, right? And even when we teach it, we say you use it as a tool. You have many tools that make you successful. This isn't just the only one. And yet I say, like, when I work with companies or groups, look, in this next, we're working on a problem here. For the next 15 minutes, let's just yes and it. And after 15 minutes, we'll go back to using all the other tools that we use, finger pointing, accusations, infighting, whatever it is your company uses. But I would say it may sound like semantics, right? But it's something that you can do that the next time somebody says something to you, you go, yes, and you build off of that. Psychologically, what you're doing is you're validating their idea. Everybody loves to have their own idea validated. Yeah. And you put your idea on it. Oh, the and shows that they're listening and contemplating. Now, they may not be yes-anding you at all, but you've done it. And when you yes and somebody, what you're doing is you're bringing them and you're keeping them on your side just a little bit longer. If you say yes, but, now you're starting to push them away. Yeah, but I don't think it's a good idea.
But means no, I don't care what you said, right?
Sure.
Yes, and it opens it up considerably.
Try it. It's simple. There's no risk. The person you're yes-anding to won't even know you're doing it. You just got to say it. Yes, and, hey, you want to go get a coffee? Yes, and I'll treat this time. Oh, okay. I don't know. You just yes-anded that. And it's something new and different and delightful.
That it is. And they'll appreciate you for being nice to them.
Sure.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I think my secret to living an abundant life is constantly being amazed or appreciative of how far I've come from where I was. where I started. I use this example, right? Is I remember when I started doing comedy, and I was just moved to Boston. I was living in Boston. Was living in a pantry. I had in a pantry in a 5-bedroom apartment. Had a little single bed, a little TV, and a pantry. And I remember sitting on that bed and thinking to myself, I've made it. I was like, I got my own room in a big city, and I'm doing comedy. And you know what? I had made it at that point, in that it was much further, and I appreciated that. And I always think back to that moment, was however much I have now, man, I had made it back when I was in that pantry.
And that's something that I talk about. When you look at the mountain that you're climbing, if you keep looking to the peak and seeing how far you have to go, it's kind of disheartening. But when you turn around on that mountain and you take a look at the view of where you've come and where you are on that journey, it dramatically changes your perspective. And that's what you're basically talking about, is watching the view from where you've come.
Sure.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I think I learned later in life that it's, however important it is to me, it's probably not nearly as important as the people around me, and that's okay. You know, I think that when you're younger and you're in a certain part of your career, you know, you're so gung-ho on go, and I want to make this happen, and you know, I got to get this done, and I want this to be done in a certain way. And why aren't these other people taking it as serious as I am? Why aren't they as motivated as I am? And I think that now that I've done this for a much longer time, you know, I'm a little bit more relaxed. I'm like, well, it's never going to mean as much to them as it does to me. It's my company, or it's my career. And I gotta flip that. And I gotta say, instead of why don't they take this more serious about what I want, I've kind of flipped that and said, like, no, my job here is to try to figure out what they want and see if I can't help them a little bit more.
And the more people you help, the more they give you what you want. And I've heard that entrepreneurs say, if I can get 80% of what I do out of somebody, I'm pretty happy with that, because no one's going to do it more than me, because if they were, they'd be out doing it for themselves. And if I can at least offload 80% of what I need done, then that allows you the time to free up and do even more.
Sure. And you got to make sure that when your time gets freed up, you give a little bit of back and you help them out. You know, and it doesn't necessarily mean with their work, but there means like, what do they want? What are their dreams? Learn a little bit like that, and offer, as your time frees up, give a little bit of that kind of consideration back.
Absolutely. What's one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
The advice that I would give to myself is complete things. I think that the struggle that I had as a young person, the same things that I think helped me get to where I am today, much like everybody, are also some of the same things that hold you back. I think that I had a very unstructured and free upbringing. And that was fantastic, because that led me to be able to believe, rightly or wrongly, that I could do a whole bunch of stuff. I think the flip side of that, though, was for a very long time, I was too immature and undisciplined to complete things unless I personally absolutely loved it. And that led me to probably situations that making things harder in my life than they needed to be. So I think what ended up happening is sometimes you're afraid to finish, because you're like, well, if I finish this, then it's complete and it won't be good enough, or I don't have the skills. It kind of goes back to that same thing I was talking about, which is I'm not good enough. So for me, it's like, hey, don't be afraid to complete things and close the book and move on.
And that's some excellent advice. If people would like to connect with you, learn more, or check out some of your clubs, what's the best way for them to learn more about you?
Best way is my clubs. My companies, what I do is at improvasylum.com. You can find it all there. The book that just came out on Wiley, you can get that on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and anywhere you can get books. It's The Art of Making SH exclamation point, where the I would be tup.com. I think you can figure it all out. Making it up, but it's a swear word. You can find the book at that, but you can also look that up. Barnes & Nobles and Amazon and all of those good things. And you can get me at Facebook, Twitter, Norm Laviolette. I'm pretty easy to find.
And I will put links to all of that into the book in the show notes so that it makes it easy for people to find you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it was a great conversation. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for your time, man.
I just want to reiterate the point of taking the time to turn around and look at the life you've lived. What have you accomplished? What are you grateful for? This week's action step of the principle of yes and is powerful. How can you use it this week to help you collaborate and try something new? I would love to hear how it worked out for you. Also, just remember, you are good enough. Lighten up a little, have a little fun. If you're still listening, you must have liked this episode, so please share it with a few friends. It can start a great conversation, and I'd appreciate that. You can also connect with me on Facebook. There's a Facebook page and a Facebook group for Richer Soul. What's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to help build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. As Norm talked about, he constantly is throwing things out, and he doesn't have an emotional attachment to failing. It's just another idea. They come and they go. Can I help you achieve your goals through coaching and accountability? Just email me, and we can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit. For many people, one session allows them to take a giant leap forward towards their dreams. You can get me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.